Warning. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised.
Ontario, 1984. Cold case finally solved. Christine Jessup. The wrong man went to prison. And I mean that literally. A 9-year-old girl got off a school bus in a small Ontario town. She walked toward an empty house, and she was never seen alive again. 3 months later, they found her body, 56 kilometers away, in the woods. She'd been sexually assaulted. She'd been stabbed to death. Police arrested the man next door. He was tried. He was acquitted. The Crown appealed. He was tried again. This time he was convicted. Life in prison. And he didn't do it. He didn't do it. Not any part of it. It took DNA to prove it. It took 18 months of his life to get it back. And when the courts finally let him walk out, one question was left standing in the middle of the room. If not him, then who? I'm Crime Watch Hub. Subscribe, because next week I'm bringing you another case where the killer was in the file the entire time. 7 in the morning. October 3rd, 1984. Janet Jessup is on the telephone. She's talking to a close friend. Another mother. Someone she knows well enough to call at 7 a.m. And on that call, she runs through the day, where she's driving, who's coming with her, what time she expects to be back. And she mentions one more thing, that Christine will be home alone that afternoon. I need you to hold on to that phone call, not the words, the fact of it. Because 36 years from this moment, nothing in this case will matter more than who was on the other end of that line. Now, why is the house empty? Because Bob Jessup isn't at work. Christine's father is 17 days into an 18-month sentence. Misappropriation of funds. Around Queensville, people had been told he was away on business. That's the version that circulated in a town of 800 people. The truth was, he was in custody. And that morning, Janet is driving out to visit him. Her son Kenny is going with her. He's 14. Christine wants to go too. She's told no. She's 9 years old. A jail visit is not a place for a 9-year-old. Kenny remembers that part of the morning clearly. His sister was upset about being left behind. That's the last argument in that house, about staying home. So the day splits in two. Janet and Kenny go one direction. Christine goes to school. 3:50 in the afternoon. The school bus pulls up at the corner near the Jessup property. Christine steps off. She has plans that evening. She's meeting a friend at the park down the road. On the walk home, she stops at the general store, buys a pack of gum. That is the last confirmed sighting of Christine Jessup, a 9-year-old, a store counter, a pack of gum. She never reaches the park. Janet and Kenny get back that evening. Front door. Empty house. And what follows is one of the largest searches Ontario had ever mounted at that point. Police, volunteers, neighbors, farmers walking their own fields. Lines of people moving shoulder to shoulder through tree lines and ditches and drainage culverts. Her school photograph goes national inside 48 hours. Every front page, every broadcast. And the search comes back with nothing. Not a witness, not a vehicle description. Not a single physical trace. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. December 31st, 1984. New Year's Eve. Near Sunderland, Ontario, about 56 kilometers from Queensville, human remains are found in a wooded area. It's Christine. 3 months. 56 kilometers. That's the distance between a school bus stop and a tree line in another county, and investigators have no idea how she covered it. They have a body, they have a location, they have almost nothing else. And within weeks, police had a suspect. He lived about 200 meters from the Jessup front door. Before I take you into that, subscribe to Crime Watch Hub right now. Because what happens next isn't a theory. It isn't speculation. It's on the record. The investigation that starts here ends with an innocent man convicted of murdering a child. It ends with him in prison, and it ends with the province of Ontario ordering a full public inquiry into how it happened. That inquiry rewrote how Canadian courts handle forensic evidence. Law students still study it. I'm going to show you exactly how they built that case, piece by piece, and exactly how little was holding it up. Subscribe, and let's go. Let's start with what police did not have. They did not have a witness who saw anyone take Christine Jessup. They did not have a vehicle. They did not have a license plate. They did not have fingerprints. They did not have blood evidence. They did not have a weapon. They did not have a confession. And they did not have a single person with a criminal record connected to that stretch of road. That is the file in early 1985. That's it. Now, hold that in your head, because I'm about to tell you who they charged. His name is Guy Paul Morin. He's 24 years old. He plays clarinet. He keeps bees in his yard. He's quiet. He doesn't handle small talk well. Neighbors describe him as unusual. That's the profile. That's the whole profile. And in a case with no physical evidence, being unusual became the starting point. So let me take you through what they actually put in front of a jury. 3 pillars, one at a time. Pillar 1. Timing. Investigators built a window around Morin's movements that afternoon. Where he was, when he got home from work. The problem is what that kind of evidence can actually prove. It can establish opportunity. It cannot establish contact. A contested account of somebody's drive home puts them near a place. It doesn't put them with a person. On its own, that goes nowhere. Pillar 2. Jailhouse informants. Men in custody came forward and claimed Morin had talked, that he'd said things behind bars that amounted to admissions. Now, think about the mechanism here. These are people with charges pending, people awaiting sentencing, people who have something to trade. And what they have to trade is information. There is no fee, but there is an incentive, a word from the Crown at a bail hearing, consideration at sentencing. The witness knows it. The Crown knows it. The jury very often does not. That category of testimony is now treated as high risk across Canadian courts. Judges give specific warnings about it. In 1985, it was simply evidence. Pillar 3. And this is the one that carried the weight. Hair and fiber analysis. Forensic scientists examined fibers recovered in the case and compared them against fibers associated with Morin. Here's what that comparison could actually establish in 1984. That 2 fibers shared a color, a diameter, a composition, a microscopic appearance. That's it. That is genuinely the limit of it. Fibers are mass-manufactured, millions of meters of the same carpet, the same upholstery, the same clothing line. Matching them tells you 2 samples are consistent. It does not tell you they came from the same source. But listen to how that lands in a courtroom. A scientist takes the stand, explains a microscope, uses the word match. And a jury hears certainty. That gap between what the science could support and how it was presented becomes the single most examined issue in this entire case. So it goes to trial. 1986, first trial. Verdict, not guilty. Acquitted. That should be the end of it. The Crown appeals. Years of legal proceedings follow. Appellate arguments. Orders. A second trial gets ordered. 1992. Second trial. Same defendant. Same evidence. Same 3 pillars. Verdict. Guilty. Sentence. Life in prison. Okay, stay with me, because I want you to see the arithmetic here. 2 juries. The same file in front of both of them. One says no, one says life. That is not a case swinging on a piece of decisive evidence. Decisive evidence doesn't produce opposite verdicts. That's a case thin enough that 12 people could look at it and land anywhere. And Guy Paul Morin goes to prison. 3 years later, a test that didn't exist in 1984 was run on the evidence, and it ended the case in about a week. January 1995. Biological evidence recovered in this case goes to a lab. Modern DNA testing gets run against Guy Paul Morin. The result comes back in days. Excluded. Not unlikely. Not inconsistent. Not probably not him. Excluded. He is not the source of that evidence. He never was. Morin is exonerated. He had already served 18 months. And Ontario does not let that sit. The province orders a full public inquiry. It becomes known as the Kaufman Commission. Now, what does an inquiry like that actually do? It takes the investigation apart, formally, under oath, with subpoena power. It examined how the investigation narrowed onto one person and stopped widening. It examined the use of in-custody informants and what those witnesses stood to gain. And it examined the forensic testimony, specifically, the distance between what the science supported and what a jury was told. The findings changed things. Canadian courts tightened how forensic evidence gets presented. Disclosure obligations were reinforced. Jailhouse informant testimony came under formal scrutiny. It is still assigned reading in Canadian law schools. So, that's the correction. That's the system fixing itself. Here's what it doesn't do. It doesn't solve anything. Clearing a man tells you who didn't do it. That's all it tells you. Christine Jessup's case does not close in 1995. It reopens. And it reopens 11 years behind. 11 years where an investigation was pointed at one house. 11 years where every other lead sat unexamined. Whoever did this had 11 years to move, to change jobs, to change cities, to age past any description anyone might have given in 1984. Toronto police take over the file that year, and here's what they inherit. 4 skids of paperwork. Not 4 boxes. 4 shipping skids, stacked. And it isn't one investigation. It's 3. York, Durham, Toronto. 3 separate police services, across 11 years, each with their own filing conventions. Their own notebooks, their own interview records. Nobody alive has read all of it. But there is one thing in that file that's genuinely valuable. The DNA profile. A complete genetic identifier of the person responsible, sitting in an evidence room. And this is where the case hits a wall that nobody can climb. Okay, stay with me, because this is the part people misunderstand about DNA. A DNA profile does not tell you who someone is. It's a sequence, a string of markers. It has no name attached to it. To turn it into a name, you need a comparison. You need a second sample from a person already in a database. That's how it works. Always has. You match a profile to a profile, and if the second profile isn't there, the first one tells you nothing. It's a key with no lock. And whoever killed Christine Jessup was not in any database. No conviction, no arrest record, no sample ever taken. So investigators are holding the most precise piece of evidence in the entire case, and it points nowhere. What follows is 25 years. Detectives pull the file periodically. That's standard practice on a cold case. They check whether any new forensic technique has emerged, whether the sample can be reprocessed, whether the databases have grown. Each time, the answer comes back the same. Nothing new to report. 1998. Nothing. 2003. Nothing. 2009. Nothing. The file goes back on the shelf. The evidence goes back into storage. Officers who worked the original case retire. Some of them die. By this point, the case is older than most of the detectives assigned to it. Then, in 2018, police in California arrested a man for a 40-year-old case, and a detective in Toronto watched that press conference very carefully. April 2018, Sacramento County, California. Police arrest a 72-year-old former officer for a series of crimes stretching back to the 1970s. A case that had been dead for 4 decades. And the technique they used had a name almost nobody outside forensics had heard. Genetic genealogy. Okay, take a look at this for a moment. because you need to understand the mechanism before you see what it did here. Remember the wall from earlier. A profile only works if the person is already in a police database. Genetic genealogy goes around that wall entirely, because it isn't looking for the offender. It's looking for his relatives. Here's how. Every year, ordinary people upload their DNA to genealogy websites. They're building family trees, finding cousins, tracing where their grandparents came from. Hundreds of thousands of profiles, voluntarily submitted, publicly searchable. Now, you take an unknown crime scene profile and run it against that pool. You are not looking for a match. You will not get one. You're looking for partial overlaps, shared segments, the genetic signature of a second cousin, a third cousin. And once you have those, the work stops being forensic and starts being historical. Genealogists take those distant relatives and build their family trees, backwards through census records, marriage certificates, obituaries, property documents. You build one tree, then another, and you look for where they intersect. Because every branch that shares DNA with your unknown profile has to lead back to a common ancestor, and from that ancestor, you work forward again, downward, generation by generation, narrowing, until only one person is left standing in the right place at the right time. That's the method. Now watch what happens when Toronto applies it. First problem. The sample. That evidence has been in storage since 1984, 34 years. DNA degrades. It fragments. Standard forensic testing reads a limited number of markers, and on material that old, there may not be enough left to read. So the sample goes to a specialist laboratory in Texas, a private lab built specifically for identification from severely limited genetic material. And they don't run standard testing on it. They run forensic-grade genome sequencing. Conventional DNA testing looks at roughly 20 locations on the genome. Sequencing of this kind reads hundreds of thousands of markers. That's the difference between a fingerprint and a photograph. And it works. From degraded 34-year-old material, they build a usable profile. That profile gets uploaded to two databases, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Those two matter specifically. They are the platforms that permit law enforcement searching. The large commercial services, the ones advertised on television, do not. They require warrants and restrict investigative use. So the search runs on the two doors that are actually open. Now, a Toronto police superintendent explained the next part publicly, and I want to be precise about it. What comes back is not a DNA match. He was clear about that. What comes back is a potential family lineage. From there, it's on investigators to work downward and identify persons of interest. That distinction is the whole ballgame. The lab gives you a direction. It does not give you a person. A team of forensic genealogists in Massachusetts takes it from there. And their own account of the work is blunt. They built the trees repeatedly, over and over, until the relationships finally resolved into something coherent. Dozens of trees, for dozens of cousins. Two partial matches anchor it. A woman in her 60s, a man in his late 70s, both living in Michigan. Neither of them has any idea. They uploaded their DNA to find family. That's all. The genealogists trace both lines backwards, cross-reference against public records. Two separate branches of one extended family, and those branches narrow, and they meet at one name. October 9th, 2020. Toronto police have a name. Calvin Hoover. 28 years old in 1984. Okay, stop right there. Before I tell you who Calvin Hoover actually was, subscribe to Crime Watch Hub right now, because I promise you the name isn't the shock in this case. The shock is the relationship, and the shock is what this man did in the weeks after Christine died. That's what's still being reviewed today. That's the part that made her family demand an independent inquiry in 2020. Subscribe and stay with me. Calvin Hoover was not a stranger. His wife, Heather, worked with Christine's father. Same company, Eastern Independent Telecom. The two families were friends. Barbecues, birthday parties. The mothers were close. They'd meet up regularly, share a pot of tea, let the children play. Christine and Kenny played with the Hoover children. Heather Hoover sometimes babysat Christine. Christine called her Auntie Heather. Now, go back 2 days before the disappearance. October 1st, 1984. Janet loads both kids into the car and drives out to visit the Hoovers. Christine is inside that house 48 hours before she's taken. And now, the phone call. 7 in the morning, October 3rd. Janet Jessup on the telephone with a close friend. The friend was Heather Hoover. That is the call where Janet mentioned Christine would be home alone. There's more. After Christine went missing, Calvin Hoover took part in the search. He helped look for her. And on the night of Christine's funeral, Hoover was inside the Jessup home. None of what I just told you was new information. Police had most of it in 1984. Here's what a detective does once he has a name. He types it into the system. Toronto police run a case management platform that holds every document from a major investigation. Digitized, searchable. Remember those 4 skids of paperwork? All of it is in there now. So the detective enters Calvin Hoover's known addresses, every place the man had lived, including a townhouse in Scarborough. And the system returns a hit. Not from 2020, not from a recent lead. From the original investigation. Calvin Hoover's address was written in an officer's notebook. In 1984. Okay, sit with that for a second, because I want to be exact about what was already in that file. He was listed as a close contact of the Jessup family at the time of the abduction. He had regular access to the home. And interview notes taken with his own wife indicated he was likely aware Christine would be alone that afternoon. All of it, documented, filed, in 1984. And Calvin Hoover was never formally interviewed as a suspect. Not during the original investigation, not during the years the case was prosecuted, not after the exoneration in 1995, not once in 36 years. That's not a man who hid. That's a man nobody looked at. And here's the mechanical reason why. Investigations run on elimination. You develop a suspect, you build, you test, you rule in or rule out. But once an investigation commits, the direction of the work changes. You stop asking who did this. You start asking how to prove it was him. Those are 2 completely different questions, and they produce 2 completely different files. Every hour spent on the second question is an hour not spent on the first. That is what a notebook entry becomes when nobody goes back to it. There's one more fact, and it closes the door on everything. Calvin Hoover died in 2015, 5 years before his name surfaced. He lived an entire adult life after 1984, married, adopted his wife's 2 sons, had 2 more with her, worked steadily, traveled for the job, aged into his 50s. Nobody around him raised a concern, ever. Now, there is exactly one piece of luck in this case. 1. When Hoover died, an autopsy was conducted, which means a direct DNA sample from him existed. Understand why that matters. Genetic genealogy had produced a name through family lineage. That's an investigative conclusion. It's built on inference. A direct sample is different. A direct sample is a comparison. So they ran it. Calvin Hoover's own DNA against the evidence recovered in 1984. It matched. Without that autopsy sample, this case closes on a family tree and a probability. With it, it closes on a comparison. That is the entire difference between a strong theory and a confirmed identification. October 15th, 2020. Toronto police hold a press conference. The interim chief tells reporters that if Calvin Hoover were alive today, the Toronto Police Service would arrest him for the death of Christine Jessup. He isn't alive, so there is no arrest. No charge, no trial, no jury, no verdict, no sentence. Nothing happens in a courtroom. Nothing ever will. _ 3 responses. Kenny Jessup said the family was stunned. Happily stunned, is how he put it. Grateful for an answer after 36 years. And then he said the other thing, that they got an answer, but there's no justice. Guy Paul Morin issued one statement. He said he was relieved for Christine's mother and her family. And he said that when DNA cleared him in 1995, he was certain that one day DNA would find the real killer. He was right. It took 25 more years. Heather Hoover said her family was devastated by the announcement. She extended her sympathies to the Jessups. She had been divorced from him for a long time. _ And then the family did something. Kenny Jessup and his mother Janet publicly backed a call from Innocence Canada, an organization that advocates for the wrongly convicted. They asked the province for an independent review. Not into the murder. That question is answered. Into how Calvin Hoover was never treated as a suspect for 36 years. Kenny put it plainly. He said he wanted all of it out. Christine Jessup would be in her early 50s now. Her family waited 36 years. First, they were given the wrong man. Then, for 25 years, they were given nothing at all. What they finally received wasn't justice. It was information. The name was in the file the whole time. Now, that public inquiry I keep mentioning, the Kaufman Commission. Next week I'm breaking it down completely, because it did something rare. It put an entire investigation under oath. It named exactly what went wrong, and it forced Canadian courts to change how they handle forensic evidence and jailhouse informants. If this case made you angry, that one explains precisely how it was allowed to happen. Subscribe to Crime Watch Hub, and I'll see you there.